Welcome back to Logical Magic Examining Esoterica. Hey, today my guest is a client of mine who we both went through an interesting process about 3 years ago that formed a bond between us in healing that continues to this day. And my guest is Megumi Ho, and she agreed to come here and talk to us a little bit about codependency recovery, recovering from abuse and trauma, generational trauma, as well as kind of working with her known vulnerabilities in the here and the now to get the best results that she can. So Megumi, hi, thank you so much for coming here. You're joining us from London. And before we start talking a little bit here, Megumi is originally from Hong Kong and is living in London at this moment. And English is not your first language, but you'd never be able to tell. I swear you speak English better than most of the native English speakers that I have met. So, Megumi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm really happy to see you, Alane. You've been helping me ever since the first time I've met you. You're basically kind of my lifesaver and my guidance all throughout the times that's been really, really difficult for me. So
We
thank
were, oh, well, Megumi, all of that, and thank you for that. But always for anybody that ends up in a healing relationship with somebody who is helping them, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a spiritual healer, please remember it is wonderful to have guidance, but give yourself all the credit in the world for all of the hard work that you've put in. Because that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Megumi, is that you have gone through a process in which your healing has been very dependent on you adhering to the things that work for you to help with your own emotional issues. And that is not to say you're broken. You were injured from a very early age and emotional capacity. And in fact, it's going to be a little bit funny because your mother is visiting you currently, but your mother doesn't speak English. And so we're talking very freely, and it's about your childhood to start. So
you.
Megumi, you're an only child, correct?
Yes, I am an only child, and my parents got divorced when I was born.
Okay, so your parents were not a very well-matched couple.
No.
And your mother came from a background that also had a lot of kind of severe emotional abuse, and she actually did a lot better than her own mother did. But there were still, and this happens, I try to explain this to people, is it's really hard for people to do better if they've never seen better. And in your mother's estimation, and rightfully so, she has done better than her parents did. But there are still a lot of, she didn't know how to raise a self-loving, confident person because no one had ever raised her to be one. But I know for a fact, look into your cards, your mom loves you like crazy. It's just there were issues with, here's what happens to people if they, first of all, discard the idea that being a mother is somehow instinctual. It is also a learned trait for many people, and most of us repeat what we saw. So Megumi, you also ended up in Australia being cared for by an aunt, correct?
Yes, yes.
And
That was my first year of university when I thought I was going to study something related to spirituality because I think that I felt like that would be healing for me, but that experience in itself, I was faced with being living under the same roof as my aunt, kind of stirred up a lot of past traumas that I didn't know existed.
mhm. And you've been in the UK now for 4 years or 5 years?
Yes, 4 years.
Okay, and you just graduated, and congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
So the reason we just want to touch on your background a little bit, which it does contain some emotional abuse, the constant need for like I wouldn't call your mother a narcissist, I wouldn't, but I would call her somebody who has exhibited her own emotional damage in
Mm-hmm.
how she didn't know how to teach something that she didn't know how to do. And so in adult life, that has affected your interpersonal relationships in that you've been working on it for a little while, go towards people who would withhold their approval and withhold their love to control you. And that is how we first met, when you were dating somebody who was a good 10 years older than you were. And my personal opinion is that he likely looked for people who were younger because they're easier to control. And then this is where I entered the scene right before you ended up in a Scandinavian country in Northern Europe for lockdown with his family and away from everybody that you knew. And you were dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Hey, Megumi, you were being incredibly strong throughout that. What was that experience like for you in lockdown? Because you were with his family, you were isolated from everybody that you knew. And I think you really only had contact with me, and we couldn't even talk. You were communicating with me via
Right.
chat.
Yeah, I remember I was so scared. It was as if I was doing something bad by seeking guidance. And I think that, I remember kind of muting myself and then just like typing very lightly because I was kind of in a position where I had to accommodate and compromise everything so that the other person is happy, but that other person is never happy. So I think I've always been kind of like a people pleaser in a sense that I just want to make sure everyone around me likes me because I constantly feel unsafe and unwanted. And I think that stems from probably my past,
Mhm.
and kind of that abandonment issue made me got really attached to this person, even though throughout the whole connection, I just felt really unsafe and disrespected because during the lockdown, I think that was when I finally met with the more real version of this person because we were
Yes.
kind of trapped in a small space. And then in the morning, I would have to meet his family. And so, in a way, we both have to bring out that like that positive, nothing is going wrong kind of energy, everything is fine. And then at nighttime, when everyone is off to bed, we don't sleep.
Yeah.
I kind of accommodate to his schedule. And then if at nighttime I express anything of kind of wanting to talk or anything, there's going to be a huge fight about how needy I am. And then I'm at a place where it's foreign. I don't know when I'm going to be able to go back to London because the day that I arrive to this country, the next day, like they closed borders, so I can't leave. And I
No,
kept on
you're
booking
trapped.
tickets. Yeah, and I remember you told me quickly get tickets, get out of there. And I got tickets, but it got canceled again and again because of the COVID circumstance. So in a way, it was like a big kind of test for me, kind of just like wake up by feeling all the pain. And I remember just feeling really scared, really I didn't know why I got myself involved. It made me question everything. But at the same time, I still had that very strong sense of attachment because I confused it with love. I think it was just I didn't want to be thrown away. And
Mhm.
I would accept any kind of treatment, but it was just horrible. Like my health, my mental health, everything just went
Your
downhill.
hair was falling in. Your hair was.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Megumi, first of all, I just really want to thank you again for being willing to talk about this because these are the stories people need to hear because what you're describing is narcissistic abuse. And the person that you were involved with, and we are not going to be saying his name here, but I did have to placate him myself during that time period where I read for him and like couldn't reveal that I understood what was going on. But he was habitually emotionally abusing you, telling you that nothing you did was good enough. I'm not trying to trigger you. I'm trying to let people know how this escalates. He went from being this reserved person in London to when he was in his home country, he was constantly berating you. If you had an emotion, then it was a sin that you were committing against him. If he was told that he was not being a particularly good boyfriend, which he was not, then it was all on you because you were too needy. At one point, I remember he started telling you he did not love you, but he would not leave you. And that he, like, you had a hard time getting to the airport at the time that you decided to leave, where you were able to leave because they kept moving that date. He tried to stop you from going, and in fact tried to move into your apartment in London when that's
Mm.
what his plan was. And you had to be so, so strong. And Megumi, how old are you?
Currently, I'm 25.
Okay. So as a 22-year-old woman, Megumi had to be stronger and brighter and smarter than somebody who was 10 years older than she was and who had done this before. And that's the part that, like, I understood the whole time and you didn't, that he had a series of girlfriends that he had abused and they had in fact left him because they were being abused. But I don't think you understood that until, can we talk briefly about what happened the night his father talked to him the next day?
Yes. So I arrived at his parents' hometown. And so when we arrived, basically introduced me. I've already met his parents already. But he did tell me beforehand that he doesn't have a good relationship with his father at all.
Mhm.
And But at that time, being a people pleaser, I wanted to make sure everything was okay with me. Everyone was okay with me being there. So I was kind of just being nice to all of them. And during kind of dinner time, he left downstairs to kind of just like play with his game and stuff. And then I went down because his father told me, hey, go and fetch him. We're going to have a nice dessert together. And so I just thought, like, as a normal person, okay, that's a sweet thing. Let's have dessert together. And then I went down, and then he saw me telling him to go upstairs, and threw I forgot if it was his phone or something, but he threw something at me, and then he just screamed at the top of his lungs saying that, how dare you, like, you know that my relationship with him is bad, and kind of just throwing everything at me. And when I tried to explain to him that, I am an outsider and I'm scared because I don't know anyone, I'm homesick, I'm stuck here, and then I don't feel safe at all, like no one is backing me up. And then he basically called me like some bad swear words, and basically told me I am needy, I am weak, I am useless, imbecile, any kind of I didn't know that was verbal abuse until Alane have told me that. And at that night I thought it was going to be over, we're just going to sleep. But he woke me up and then sat me at the edge of the bed. I was already feeling, okay, something is going to happen, it's going to happen again, this argument. And then it was just this constant kind of, I can see him shifting from like a sensible person to suddenly it's as if I don't see any soul. I felt quite scared. I don't know what's going to come out of his mouth. And he started to kind of talk about my past that I've shared with him, with about my family and
weaponizing your
father
past.
not being there. And then exactly, and basically using that and throwing it at me, poking all the pain and wounds that he knows will trigger me, and basically say that's why, kind of just saying that that's why people leave you, you're the reason I have depression, you're the reason I act this way, and kind of throwing that all on me. And when I cried, he basically told me that, how dare you cry, letting your disgusting energy and toxins onto the bed sheets. Now I can't sleep in the same bed, you go wash your face. And I remember I was so heartbroken and so scared, to the point where I ran to the bathroom and I vomited like acid. Basically, there's nothing for me to throw up anymore. I was just crying. And he kind of, there's times when I get to that point and he would take out a phone and film me and kind of be like, look at how ridiculous this is. And I actually got to think, oh, maybe I am that, ridiculous, or else why would someone say these things to me or do these things to me? I'm too needy, I'm too, insensitive, all that kind of thing kind of just like got into my head. But I remember just my body felt too overwhelmed that the next day when I woke up, I was numb. I couldn't feel any emotion. And for some reason, that kind of really alarmed me. I was, because I'm a very kind of feeling kind of person. And at that point, the numbness made me realize that something is going wrong. I'm in a very, very, very toxic situation. And the next morning, his father asked him to go upstairs, and I just thought it was just a family thing. And then when he came down, he told me, it's all because of you, you stirred things up, that my family now dislike me because of you. He basically told me he heard what I said to you, and he's going to send me to jail the next time he hears it. And I think I was kind of like, wow, so this is bad, because a parent has kind of stood up for me in a way. And I kind of recognize that to be just something I've never experienced, but very scary, because it was just really horrible. I was already incredibly drained and don't know what to do.
Megumi, you were please, whenever you think back on that, remember how incredibly strong that you had to be, because you were in a foreign country, you were by yourself, you were surrounded by people whose first affiliation would be to that other person. And he had weaponized everything he had ever learned about you against you. And you had to be able to hold on to your feeling of your own identity. And the reason, and you are like, I just cannot thank you enough for being willing to talk about this, because it's so important for people who have been abused to hear someone else's story, so that they can start recognizing the ways in which they've been abused. And until his father, and I was constantly in the background trying to be like, no, that's abuse, it's abuse, it's abuse. But also hampered by the fact that I was in Los Angeles, California throughout all of this. I'm in Southern California, so I was almost helpless to do anything to help you. And having somebody else recognize your mistreatment is one of the keys that people have to have in order to start breaking it down and releasing and escaping from that trauma. And sometimes if you can't get it from a secondary source like his father, then you have to become the source of, if I was seeing this happen to somebody else, what would I think? Everything in healing is hinges on the ability to take a different or a greater perspective and seeing it from the inside because it was triggering you. And he was doing that on purpose. And in my own life, during a long divorce battle, one of the things that really helped me was seeing how professionals in Southern California in divorce law were reacting to my ex-husband. And they kept doing things like giving me discounted fees or not charging me at all. They were just appalled. And it finally began to dawn on me, oh, everybody else sees him as being this particular like punishing person. He's taking it way over the top. They understand that there's something wrong. And to this day, that has been that was the moment of clarity for me. And I think what happened to you that summer was one of the moments of clarity for you. But then because it was such an entrenched form of abuse, because you had been surrounded by the generational trauma, which the person we're talking about who abused you, you witnessed his interpersonal generational trauma. You saw what his own father was like, because even though his father said, I will send you to jail, his father was actually a very condemning and abusive individual in his own right who had formed that individual. The person who was abusing you was actually just repeating the pattern of what his father had done to him. So you get out of Norway, like everybody involved, me included, are biting our nails, making sure you can get on that darn plane because he didn't want to take you at the last moment. And that was when he was telling you things like, I don't actually really love you, but I won't leave. I mean, he was messing with your head on it's called gaslighting. It's not just trying to convince somebody that they're insane. It is challenging their perception of reality and telling them over and over again that your perception is incorrect. Now, there is absolutely no way on this verdant earth that anybody should stay with someone who says, I don't love you, but I know you don't want to be left, so I won't leave you. It's like, yeah, you stop at the, you don't love me, bye, it's time to go, is the best policy around that. But when you got back to the UK and you found your first flat and he wanted to come and live with you and he had all these plans for how he was going to be spending your money as well. So the abuse just kept escalating for, I would say, 2 or 3 months until you were able to start breaking things off with him. And luckily, he was still in the other country. And so that helped enable it. But Megumi, he kept trying, didn't he?
He did. He did keep trying. I remember it's just, I remember I kind of, after he knows that I've managed everything and I moved into the flat, he was quite excited to move over, obviously. I mean, with money, I was kind of being silly, like just like helping him. So he was reliant on me in that way. And I think the caretaking side of me wanted to like, I felt like, oh, poor guy, like I want to help him and stuff like that. And then I remember, but every time I would call him to tell him about the moving process, he wasn't very supportive. It was more kind of like asking, you know, what's the convenient places nearby. And I remember we got into a very petty fight where I told him that, you know, the supermarkets are really near. It's just 10 minutes walk. And then he kind of burst out and be like, you're lying, like that's not a close distance, that's really long, like why would you lie? And I think that made me realize that I was constantly being put down, and this is such a tiny little thing, there's much more happy thing going on, and I don't know why the focus was there. And I think the stronger I become, or the more that I'm doing for myself, I can see him kind of trying to poke things here and there. And because I gave myself back a space when I moved back to London and did something for myself by moving, I think I kind of started to see how I can paint my own life.
Yes.
And even though I still didn't want to break up at that point, I thought it would be much better to do so and feel all the pain than him coming here and being stuck in my space that it feels like a blank sheet of paper that I'm laying out, and I was really scared. And especially I've spoken to you after I came back to London and moving to a new place. And then you've really guided me and reminded me. And you were really straightforward, no sugarcoating, because you knew what was going on. And you really knew that I had to really save myself and choose myself and see abuse for what it is. And I think that gave me strength to confirm that it was really that bad. And so I told him, that's it for us. And then that was when he said, I love you. Like throughout the
Yes.
2 years, that was when he said it. I know. And that is what made me realize at that point I had no feelings. Like I was waiting for this word for 2 years, but it came at a time when I realized who he was at that time. And I think that made me even more sure that I did the right thing,
He was
because he was
unlocked.
trying to, yeah, he knew what I wanted to hear all this time.
And so he was using it as a form of leverage. And you did talk about one of the things that people have to understand. We're talking clearly about gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, generational trauma, and it can be involving generational curses as well. And Megumi, that is one of the things that, like, because I am a spiritual worker, there is a spiritual component to this as well. There are attachments that go along with some of these behaviors that influence somebody's thinking. So even though you had been badly, badly abused, your mind remember, denial is a protective construct within our minds. Your mind kept shelving these really, really significant events about that were just outright obvious abuse and trying to maintain the relationship, because you had lost your identity to the idea of, if this person doesn't love me, that means I'm not lovable. Because he was playing this game of, I keep withdrawing my approval unless you're doing what I want. If I'm approving of you, then you feel good about yourself. And if I'm not, then you feel terrible about yourself. And it is a form of documented and predictable abuse. And you did so well with it, because people lose decades of their lives to this type of relationship. And you were able to, and yes, you did have me advising you, but Megumi, you had to make all of those choices and do all of those things. And one of the things you did was you started seeing a therapist.
Mm.
And another thing that you did was you got a trainer, because exercise to stir up endorphins to help change your brain chemistry is one of the things that can help you learn how to cope with depression and anxiety and some of the other things that go along with that, which is a tendency to disassociate when traumatized or triggered. And when you first initially broke up, Megumi, this is the part that it helps for other people to hear this. Can we talk a little bit how you felt about your well-being that
Mm.
Christmas? Because it was dire, man. Like, I've been through
Mm.
it too. You kind of feel like you're dying.
Yeah.
But what happened for you when you finally managed to close that door?
I think at that point I was still fearful of him when I sent the message of breaking up. I wrote a really long letter, and when I sent it, I specifically told him that he cannot contact or call me. He can text to respond, because I was familiar with how he does things, how he reacts to things. And I think I was so scared I might get kind of brainwashed again. And I was scared to see him, to hear the kind of screeching, angry voice. And
Yeah.
so at least at that point, I thought I have to, the breakup is already like a boundary setting. And so I might as well just say, don't contact me. And then right after that, I just went into a full, I think it was almost kind of like a month or maybe less than a month, but at the beginning few weeks, I already lost my sense of self when I was with him. But when I said I'm breaking up with him and I broke up with him, I think I was left with my own feelings, and all the broken pieces is left for myself to clean up and to rebuild. But I didn't feel like I can and am capable, because I was constantly being kind of thrown words that made me doubt myself, and I felt unworthy and I felt unloved, and for some reason the breakup made me feel like I was abandoned again, even though I chose myself. And I think I just couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I was slowly feeling like I'm giving up on myself. And it was my second year of university as well. I was thinking, what am I doing to myself? Like,
Mhm.
my whole purpose here in London is to learn, yet I got into this situation. And yes, I've broken up, but I'm already like a broken person. I didn't have passion. Thinking about school, it was kind of like chores. Something that I was so passionate about with creative arts, I suddenly lost touch with it. Spirituality became kind of just I just couldn't face it, because I think spiritual practice makes me realize I have to face my pain. But at that point, the pain was so unbearable because I was completely wrapped in it. I had no direction at all. And I remember just completely giving up on myself. I had no faith in kind of even meeting new people, not because I'm scared, but because I've kind of completely lost energy. I was completely drained and burnt out and hurt and confused at the same time. And I was kind of rejecting every friendship that is coming my way and kind of distancing myself for a long time, and just feel like nobody would understand me, just kind of a lot of guilt, as well as hurt, as well as just a lot of, I lost my sense of identity. And so I just knew that, but talking with you and you guiding me, I knew that, I, when you tell me these things that are right and that are healing and that are, in a way, it was a beam of light, because I didn't know there is a step forward. But you've told me your experiences, you've told me what you saw and what I can try to learn about recovering from codependency and toxic relationships and recovering from abusive relationships. I just thought, you know what? If I'm just going to continue laying here crying, there's nothing, I can't really pull myself out. So might as well find someone in London that I can meet face to face, that I can cry, I can be
Yes.
as broken as I can be in a safe space. And
Someone who's trained as well.
yeah, exactly.
Like
Yes, yes,
therapists are
exactly.
amazing. Therapists are amazing.
Yeah.
And everything that you did, Megumi, even though people were helping you in guiding you, you were the person taking the steps. And please always take so much pride in it, because it is difficult. And it can function like a form of addiction. It's not really a form of addiction. It is a form of compulsivity. It is a form of compulsion. A lot of trauma survivors have a form of OCD that is based in trauma, in which they engage in the same behavior over and over again, desperately seeking safety or an answer or solace. And what you experienced when you and this person parted ways is a form of emotional, energetic withdrawal that causes complete and total dysphoria. And so whenever I'm helping somebody leave a particularly toxic relationship, they're ready to leave, that is something they have to be prepared for. And it does pass. And that was part of the reason that I wanted to talk to you about it, because you were able to get through that long, dark night of your soul in that winter and begin to emerge and begin to go towards friendships again. And then you had, and like, I hope you still find it as amusing as I do, your test pancake relationship afterwards with another individual that we're not going to be naming people because people out, but he was a younger guy in your age group. And through that relationship, what'd you learn, Megumi?
Through that relationship, I think I'm quite grateful for what happened, because it gave me a chance for like a bit more healed version of myself to kind of spot what might be going on, and then seeing another person kind of becoming very attached to me. And then I had to
He was
I
playing
had to
your role. He was playing your role.
Yes,
You
yes,
weren't
yes, yes.
abusing him, but he
Yeah.
lost his entire identity to the idea that
Yes. Yes, and
he
I
barely
saw
knew
that.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
We're
think
only laughing because everything worked out fine for that
yeah, yeah,
genuinely
yeah.
nice young man.
Yeah, he
It
was.
was it was an interesting thing because he really, really, really believed that you were the one true love of his life, because he's also codependent due to his own trauma.
Mm,
And here's the thing, we attract people who are in the same energy that we are. And we were in contact through that. And again, this is a nice young person. He genuinely
mm,
is. I also read for him. And that he's a nice person. But you just were both in a healing phase of your life as it was, and you both provided lessons for one another. And you learned about your own power through that particular person in
yeah,
a lot of ways as well, and
yeah.
conquering your fear. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I learned. I think it was because at the beginning with this person, I felt like it was a safe space,
Mhm.
because he was very respectful of kind of, at the beginning, there was a lot of if I communicate clearly with him, he would respect it and he won't cross the line.
Mhm.
And so there was one point, I think, um, there's two things I want to share. The first one is I remember I accidentally broke his necklace. And the first kind of reaction I had was still kind of reflective of like
The
what
trauma.
triggered me. I was scared he might raise his fist or say something mean, but he didn't. He held on to me. He saw me panicking and he said, "It's okay. We can buy a new one. If it's broken, you don't have to be scared." And I think that allowed me to realize what a normal
Yeah,
connection or dynamic should be like. And I think at that point, I started to understand and see that, oh, so this is what is normal. And
exactly.
I started to think, kind of, to continue. I saw that I can already at the beginning see that it was a healing kind of dynamic because he was hurt before, he was kind of abused before, and I was abused before. And so we kind of found that kind of comfort with each other. But at the same time, I was at a place where I know I cannot step into a codependent relationship. So I kept my boundaries
Yeah.
and I was learning how to say no, or learning how to say, tell him exactly how I'm feeling without, leading someone on, because I know that would be horrible. But I think at the end he was very super super attached, and then he was just kind of really forcing the idea onto me, but I still was able to bravely say no to him and explain very clearly and kind of just like cut things off by being respectful. And I think at first he didn't react well at all. But in the end, I think after he calmed down, we both kind of just peacefully drifted apart.
Yes. And like, again, this is a nice person. This is a good young person, a good young man. And like, I'm not saying that in a reductive fashion at all. He was just the relationship you had with him, or like a lot of early relationships in which you learn that like over the course of time, an initial attraction may not lead to long-term compatibility, but it was healing for both of you. And I know you've bumped into him in the interim and seen him, and that everything actually did turn out just fine for him as well. And that it has been a long journey of you understanding what you described with when you broke his necklace and you were terrified that he was going to flip out on you and potentially hurt you. And that is called a trigger, but it's also called a disproportionate response, which when somebody says something like that, it's like they're making a choice. Hey, you're having a disproportionate response. No, what it means is there is unpacked energetic emotional trauma behind a particular issue. So when you broke his necklace, you had a much bigger reaction than breaking a necklace would normally warrant, because you were still working on healing the trauma that went along with long-term abuse from your former relationship. And then again, there are certain things within your family dynamic. Again, they didn't learn any better because they didn't experience any better. And so they all actually did better than their origin story. And sincerely, which I'm not going to go into because that's some pretty deep stuff. But that I'm trying to commend the people involved for the progress that they did make, understanding that they did so without any tools. But when you gain the tools, then you can make even more progress. And that's something I've seen you work on over and over again, is recognizing, is the reaction that I'm having based in the here and the now, based only on this, or is old stuff coming out of the closets because I'm still working on it? And how do you think you're doing with that, Megumi?
Mm, how do I think I'm doing with
Working
sorry,
with triggers. It's okay. It's
all the
okay.
triggers?
Yeah.
Um, I think I am definitely getting much better at it because because after during the year of healing, I've met up with different kind of people, and I think from different kind of dynamics and connections, I've learned to kind of see what triggers me
Mhm.
and what is normal and what is not normal. And through that, and because of having an abusive, experience before, it becomes very easily, it would be very easy for me to see um, my triggers, because whenever I am involved or close with a male figure, I I'm always kind of nervous.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes just seeing how they react to me, I think by just saying no to them,
Mhm.
or kind of setting boundaries with people is the fastest way to see if that person can be respectful. I think. And I was lucky enough that in my healing journey, all the people that came into my life was helpful in aiding that healing process. And I think that's why even now there are days when I still feel kind of lonely in the healing journey, but I also know that it needs to be that way, or else it's so easy for me to rely on something or rely on someone and fall back into that kind of codependent dynamic with even friendships, I would say. Even
Exactly.
friendships. There was time when I got at first it was like I need to distance myself with everyone, and then good friends came in, and then I started to really want to just like rely on them, and then I saw that codependency doesn't just kind of limit itself in a love relationship. It can be everything because of my past family dynamics.
That is a really key and important part to focus on when we're talking about healing from codependency, is that if you've had a history with codependency, and I need people to understand it is not a character flaw. I'm going to say this over and over again until we get it carved out in the mountain if I need to. It is not a character flaw. It is an energetic and an emotional injury to your core being. When we are born, we have certain emotional needs that if they are not fulfilled, there will be essentially gaps within our emotional foundation that we have to learn how to fill in as adults by ourselves in order to repair the damage. And the damage can be repaired, but you have to look at it as an injury that you are rehabilitating in your emotional response system, because that's what it is. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you're overly invested in relationships. It's that truly a primary need in a human being's emotional construction was denied to you. And so you look for it in external relationships. And if you do go away from, romantic relationships, it can be in friendships, it can be in families, it can be anything in which you no longer are in touch with your own feelings and your own needs, and you're prioritizing them in a way. And we can choose to prioritize somebody else's needs, but it has to be a choice rather than not understanding that we have a right to our own feelings and to our own needs being met in relationships. And so you've been very cognizant of that, and you've made so much progress. One of the things that you did that was so smart was you got a pet.
Oh
Because
yeah.
that's so Queen Luna, Queen Luna, the world's most regal cat who will show you her displeasure. It's very good for people who have a tendency to caretake in relationships to have pets, because that is a relationship that by nature is not going to be a relationship of equals. You will have more power, but it will also allow you to perform a lot of caretaking. And it also keeps people on track in their own healing journey. I know that when I was trying to recover from so much trauma, 4 years ago, one of the things that really helped me was I had to get up and walk my dogs every day. No matter what, they were not taking the day off. It didn't matter what I felt like, even if I was scraping myself up off my near deathbed, I needed to get up and take care of the dogs. And how has having Luna helped you?
I think having her was kind of a roller coaster, but overall it's definitely the best decision ever. At first, I think she even taking care of her triggered me a little bit when it comes to the caretaking, because the last time I was caregiving or caretaking someone, I was badly abused. So when this innocent little baby animal came into my life, I at first I was quite scared of the familiar feeling of caregiving. But then as I started to take care of her, I started to feel it is life itself. And she was the one that was the innocent one, if I was abusive to her, like she can't do anything about it. And so I think I was taking care of her, and at the same time I was healing a part of myself as well, kind of just like loving love, and then it just kind of a very beautiful mirroring effect, I think, and seeing her grow as well. And then just
And
it was a very nice experience.
and
It is a nice experience.
from what I've observed as well, one of the funnier things about it is that Luna does have moods. and she
Yes.
likes people more than others. And so it starts to turn this like emotional control factor into something that's amusing, because hilariously, your little cat's emotionally controlling.
Yes. Yes, she is. She is.
Wants you to know when she's ticked off. And
Yeah.
it gave you that needed extra level of perception and perspective when it comes to how somebody acts is about them, not about you. And now,
Mm.
when you're around your mother, you can see all of the ways in which she is perpetuating cycles that she did not begin. I have a lot of compassion for your mom. Your mom genuinely does love you, but she doesn't possess certain skills. And I think now when you're around her, you can make, it's always a choice. Every time we have an interaction as we are healing, particularly with the people who can cause us to regress, which are always going to be the people who were the originators or the perpetrators in later years of an abuse against us, it can be very triggering. But all of the things that you've learned have helped you in viewing your mother as having all her own stuff, and that what she does is not about your value or your worth, but rather about the wounds within she has never figured out how to heal. And can you tell me a little bit how things have improved with both your parents, because you have a better relationship with your dad as well?
Yes. So my dad was not in my life, not involved in my life throughout the time that I was, just like he only came back into my life when I was, I think, living in London, like when I started university. He was starting to wanting to help out with the financial matters. He started to wanted to be a little bit part of my life. And I think because he's never really been a father figure, he doesn't really have experience with me. I've never had experience with him. So we don't know, he didn't know how to communicate with me. But this year, I finally had an opportunity to see him and visit, and he was in France, and I went to visit him, and then I brought him back to London to see my life, to allow him to have a glimpse of his daughter's life. And I think I got to hear his version of, what happened with my mother's side of the family and with my mother. And then I already heard my mother's side of the story growing up. So I kind of had this kind of prejudiced look when it comes to my father. And then him telling me his side of the story, I kind of saw how they were never really meant to be, that they both had this idea of love, idea of attachment, idea of, who they were at the time, even though they're both confused themselves, and they merged them together and it was just a mess. And now that I've met him, I think it helped me see, it helped me kind of, it was a healing experience in itself as well. There's no one to blame. I think everyone have their pain as individuals, and I think everyone learn every step of the way. And I think him wanting to come into my life is also a sign of him wanting to kind of become a part of my life, and he knows that he's missed out a lot. And I think by me connecting with him, my mother saw that, and I think she obviously, because I'm her daughter and she's quite scared of losing me in a way, and I think she was constantly kind of checking in on what I'm doing with him and getting information on what he's told me. And I think that was quite an interesting dynamic, but quite stressful. I started to feel like I had to care gift to both of them and kind of parent both of them at the same time. And I wanted to feel, I almost wanted to take on the responsibility to mend things, but then you gave me, you kind of woke me up in that. And I didn't need to kind of take on the responsibility of my parents'
Yeah,
life.
and that's a very common dynamic among emotionally abused, physically abused people, is that they have they become a form of surrogate parent for their own parents, because when you get older, you recognize that this person is just like a grown-up wounded kid. And particularly when it comes to your father, who, like, he's got a good heart and he cares about you as well. He had a very interesting situation growing up. His parents were not terrible, they weren't abusive. But what happened to him and both of his brothers was they were all gifted in particular areas, and they were essentially taken from their homes when they were like, what, 8 years old? and
Mm.
given over to training for being a dancer and for, in your father's case, a musician. And you've got, none of them had a normal experience. They weren't raised by parents. They were raised by an authoritarian government, basically.
Mm.
And so it was very difficult for them to know what to do, how to do what they had never seen. And that is another part of your father's legacy, is that he literally had no idea how to be a parent because he was taken away from his parents in order to enhance a gift, but he was given to a very unemotional and controlling structure. He didn't know how to do what he had never seen, but the love was there. And then, quite frankly, your mom's family scared the crap out of him. So
Yeah.
that part too. There was that part too. There's always, as you heal, one of the most healing things is understanding that many times what happens to us personally is not about us personally. And I shared the story of my mom finding out that my mother had given away, had placed for adoption another baby, like 2 years before I was born. With finally, that freed me from thinking it was about me, that she didn't, like, I thought she just didn't want me. It's like, oh, she just didn't want kids. I understand that now. And it was very, 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 very helpful. And in your own journey, I think a lot of the things that you've learned about your emotional construct and where it comes from have helped free you from some of your pain as well. I'm not trying to talk for you. I'm just trying to set up the next question, which is, Megumi, how can you actually see the ways in which much of your childhood was likely inevitable and not actually about your worth?
Alane, can you repeat that? The internet like chopped up.
No, no worries, because we are in separate countries right now. I was just talking about, can you see the ways in which the ways you were mistreated, even though it hurt you as a child, can you see the influences on both of your parents that explain it? Because your parents, neither of them received good parenting, so they didn't know
Mm.
how to give good parenting. And the whole point in bringing that up is how freeing it is to understand, oh, it's not about my worth or my
Yeah.
value or whether or not I'm lovable. So that was really what I was asking you about, is
Mhm.
like, what difference has that made?
I think that made me like you said, it was a liberating feeling because then I saw them as individuals. They had individual experiences. There's a reason to why they react to certain things or why they walked away from certain things or why they would treat people the way they did or how my mom raised me. And I kind of, now looking back, I was able to kind of pull myself out of the situation and see that they were in pain and kind of just, as well as my father being here and seeing him as an individual, because it was, I think seeing him helped me kind of release some anxiety with my relationship with my mother because I wasn't really familiar with my father. So I was able to kind of, with an open eye, open ear, I can listen to his life journey and why he walked away from our family. And he basically told me very straightforward. He said, because I wanted things for myself because I wanted to choose me. And so I noticed it wasn't him thinking because I don't love you or anything. I mean, for me, still, I feel like it was quite irresponsible. But at the same time, I'm able to understand that, in his journey, that was his priority. And and now kind of hearing both side of the story, I kind of just think that everyone is not easy, and I feel like I'm strong enough thanks to, in a way, the experiences I had in the past as well as the abusive relationship I had. And the most important part that made me strong was facing it and healing and taking time to allow myself to kind of go through all the downhills and the uphills and everything. And I got to learn that everything that the other person does is a reflection of themselves. And I think even with my father, I learned to set boundaries with him. I used to wait on him all the time as a kid, wanting the father to love me, waiting on him, and then him never showing up and crying my eyes out. And this time I learned that I can still love him, but I need to accept that that's who he is. And I'm not, he won't be able to hurt me if I see him for who he is. And I think that has helped me liberate. And even now, if he doesn't contact me, I have no pain, no fear.
And you know, that's the other thing is you got to see your father just as a person
Yeah.
versus just being your dad. Now, recovery from this level of abuse, you know, it took decades to be put into place. It's going to take a little bit of time to undo it. And you're still working with things, particularly with your anxiety. And that is understandable, but there are lots of tools that you use. And Megumi, you're a practicing Buddhist, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And how has your connection to Buddhism helped you in your journey as well?
Mm, I think when I was really young, I've already been really drawn to Buddhism because it talks about facing your suffering and that all the suffering is caused by the sense of attachment to yourself or to others. And I think I've always kind of feel like I get it, but I haven't had enough experience that wowed me enough to put me in a very painful situation and see, oh my gosh, like this thing really is making me suffering until, kind of growing up and then being in like an adult kind of love relationship and experiencing abuse and then seeing kind of how I got so attached to something. And then I kind of saw how that suffering came about, as well as in Buddhism, it talks about how if you see the suffering and if you can pinpoint and find the root causes of it, then you're already kind of liberating yourself because you are able to kind of dissect it and realize what's the cause and see the wound and start tending to it. And I think during my healing journey, all the past kind of learning of the Buddhist practices came back to me. And I was able to apply those teachings and realizations into my realizations because it's starting to make sense to me. And I think that's when my spiritual practice became part of my healing journey and became part of my everyday life instead of just, spirituality is like a book and I read it and then I can't really apply it in anything.
You were so smart in that, you know, you got a trainer, you started working out to have exercise, you spoke to a therapist, you have a spiritual practice. You didn't look to one source to provide a healing. You looked to many sources to provide answers that you could put into practice throughout your daily life. And honest to goodness, I know you're still working on healing things, and that is completely understandable. But Megumi, thank you so much for being willing to share part of your story because it is invaluable for people who are facing a journey of healing to understand that even if it starts out with like this, I will never be okay. There's no way I'm coming from this particular feeling into being happy and healthy and feeling like I have my own power. And I know that sometimes it can be day to day for you, but journeys of healing always are. Megumi, how has your feeling about who you are in this world changed over the course of your healing journey?
Mm, wow, that is an important question, a big one too.
And you're just such a good sport because of course you have to I'm challenging for native English speakers because I use so many unusual words and I'm always so aware that you have to translate literally everything I say. And you still come back with good answers. So no pressure on it. If that's something that you're like, hey, it's this way today, but it may be something next week. But I was just wondering because I know things have changed radically for you over the course of 3 years.
I think one thing that immediately popped in my head is I finally can see that I have the power myself to give love to myself. I've always seeked outwards when it comes to love. I've always thought that, only other people can give me love in order for me to feel loved. So I was depending on outside sources.
Mhm.
But growing up with all different impermanent circumstances coming in and out, I was constantly out of control because I didn't know I can have control in how I react to circumstances and changes in my life. I was always kind of following the current, not really knowing that I can see the waves and I can kind of just calmly step away and look at the whole situation. I always got involved, and I always feel like I am with all the different kind of roller coaster experiences. And now I finally feel like seeing what had happened in my past, and also hearing a lot about what other people are going through as well. I noticed that I think hearing about how other people face pain, or hearing that other people are in pain, and then as a third person giving advice to them, I noticed that, like you said, you reminded me of this. I have to talk to myself as if, I am my own friend. And I think that helped me in realizing that if I am able to pull myself outside of situations and bad circumstances, in a way I'm able to not be so mean with the words I choose to tell myself. I always kind of internalize and blame myself for not being strong enough. I think after what had happened in the past and going through healing, I was in a place where I know I have to start loving myself, but I would also beat myself up when I catch myself being in a bad or a sad or a lonely mood. I think I was quite, I always wanted myself to be strong, but I think now I realize that it's okay because I'm human, and it's okay because feelings comes and goes. But when I'm sad, I can just give myself time because I know that everything is going to turn out okay. Like good or bad feelings, they're the same. And I
Um,
can finally, yeah, trust myself. And I think that gave me a lot of power. And I know I cannot, there's a lot more that's going to come into my life that I cannot control. But I think that throughout the year of healing, as well as you being here for me and guiding me, I started to realize that I can listen to myself, and I can provide, even guidance and strength to myself. And
You're
that,
you're you're
yeah,
so strong, Megumi. You are like
no,
genuinely like when you're saying, that you don't feel like you're strong enough sometimes is like, no, you're an incredibly strong person. And I just love the hell out of you. And
I
it's
love you
not
too.
just because we went through one of the most stressful situations together ever. Megumi, this is what I'm going to close out with because this is how the universe works for us. This is how we can make our own choices, and for the most part, they guide our path, but that our spirit guides and something beyond this is trying to help because there is a particular set of circumstances in my life blew up resoundingly, ending a form of the life that I had had on my actual birthday, my 4 years ago. My entire life changed. And looking back now, part of it was that I needed to be in a particular time and place to do particular things in order to help myself and others. And you are one of those people because the service that you met me on, I would never work for now. Like it genuinely, it's like it's potentially a human trafficking site, and I'm not kidding. And I'm not going to name it because hey, I don't want to get sued. But that I was on that service briefly, and that is where you found me. And I had wondered before that, my gosh, why do I have to do this? This is like demeaning and humiliating on so many levels. And there were three people I needed to meet from there who needed help in very particular ways. And I didn't need to stay there. In fact, have not been on it in years. But you are one of the reasons that when I think about, can I see the universe acting in my life in a way that is meaningful and has purpose and has a plan behind it? What happened in these strange confluence of events that brought two people who would never naturally meet together. And then it was very key to healing in order. And it healed me as well, because my goodness, was I able to ever up my ability to handle stress on that? Because it was frightening from a remove, knowing that I really didn't have any power to get in there and get you out of there. And you were the person who got you out of there. You are the person who took all of the steps to go towards your healing, and you have been so brave about the changes that you need to make. And Megumi, again, you've been so brave here today talking about some things that can be very difficult, but I hope are very helpful for other people to hear. Is there any place that people can find your artwork or any of the things that you work on?
Um, I am thinking of putting more of my artwork and upload it on my Instagram. I think Instagram is the place where I will most likely put all of my new artworks up there. So Instagram would be
Okay,
a
are you
better way.
comfortable sharing your tag, or would you rather wait for a different time?
I don't mind sharing it. It's
Okay.
just that it doesn't have a lot on there yet.
Okay. All right. Your compassion cures on Instagram.
Compassion cures, and then the lower dash, is it?
Mhm.
And
Underscore.
then I need to check. What?
She's going to be checking on that while I tell you where you
Oh,
can find me. Okay, go ahead.
it's compassion, and then the lowercase dash,
Underscore.
and then cures, and then that's
Passion
all.
underscore cures on Instagram. And she's a very, very, very gifted artist. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you
me,
so
Megumi.
much, Elise.
I think you are one of the most awesome people I've ever met, and I genuinely have love for you. My name is Alane. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a tarot card reading or a life coaching session. You can find me on my YouTube channel, which is Cronecast at the Rising Moon. You do not mean Chromecast, you mean Cronecast with an N. And I will see you again next time here on Logical Magic, examining esoterica. Heal and be magical.